What is going on, everybody? James Hancock here, and back to review Mercy, starring Chris Pratt and Rebecca Ferguson. It's a sci-fi murder mystery getting released by Amazon MGM, meaning that it'll be coming to Prime Video sooner rather than later. But that date is still to be determined at this time. In any case, I'll be going spoiler-free for this video, but big picture, I'd argue that for the first hour or so of this movie, it's just as bad as the trailer suggests. Pratt plays a cop who's forced to defend himself against an AI judge, jury, and executioner who will kill him within 90 minutes because this movie needs a ticking clock to create a sense of urgency, even though it makes absolutely zero sense in the context of the movie because evidence is still being gathered at the time of the trial. But for the first hour or so, thanks to the one-note, bland, kind of vapid and predictable style of storytelling, I could feel my butt repeatedly rising from my seat. And I was ready to bail on the movie entirely, apart from my desire to vote with my dollars and support new original science fiction movies being released theatrically by a major streamer, but more on that in a bit. But then a weird thing happened during the climax. I started to give a shit and wanted to know how it was all going to end, and maybe I'm just a sucker for car chases and explosions, etc. Or maybe suddenly director Timur Bekmambetov dug deep for some emotion that was not there in the script. At a minimum, it became watchable, or a rental, as we used to say back in the day, where you had to physically drive to a video store and rent 2 or 3 movies to argue about with your family. So at a minimum, I do think Mercy will get some eyeballs on it when it eventually drops on Prime Video. However, plenty of people, and rightfully so, are going to mock the ever-living shit out of it. The exact same way they did War of the Worlds when it dropped on Prime Video last summer, because both movies are part of this new weird trend where they try to make a movie without actually filming a movie, where they're like, all right, how can we do this where like the main character's in the same room for 90% of the movie and they don't have to actually share any scenes with any other actors? Somebody's going to need to come up with a cool new name for that school of filmmaking, because both War of the Worlds as well as Mercy absolutely fall into that category. Although Mercy finally gets good when people are allowed actually to go out and do stuff, which, surprise, surprise, when you make a movie, people want to see actors playing characters doing things. It's opposed to just sitting in a chair delivering a performance where, to put it kindly, even if you love Chris Pratt from all the movies that he's done over the last 10 or 12 years, but AI could have delivered, if you said to an AI, like, I don't even know how that works, but if you put in the input, deliver a typical Chris Pratt performance from a chair yelling defiantly at AI, well then that's basically what the first hour of this movie turned out to be.
You're before this court today charged with the murder of your wife.
Oh my God.
Your guilt must fall below the 92% threshold, or you will be executed in precisely 90 minutes.
And I have no evidence or information to support this theory, but my guess is that neither Chris Pratt nor Rebecca Ferguson were ever in the same room when they shot this movie, in spite of the fact that they are talking to each other the entire fucking movie. And you would think that when the entire, thrust of the movie hinges upon the interaction of 2 characters, maybe allow them to actually have meaningful interactions with emotion and drama and ebbs and flows. But Rebecca Ferguson is just robotically reading her lines the entire movie, and Chris Pratt's in his chair yelling and screaming, and it gets incredibly predictable and incredibly monotonous very, very quickly. But even when a movie feels like a series of budgetary and creative shortcuts kind of loosely strung together or connected with some last-minute band-aids, it would be forgivable if the dialogue were incredible and the performances were incredible. It'd almost be like an interesting kind of sci-fi experiment, but the reality is this probably should have just been a really cool short film. What would happen if we turned over our legal system and our court system to AI? What might happen when a cop who's been arresting people and putting them in that chair suddenly finds himself in that chair, forced to answer a few questions? That would be, a more or less interesting 25-minute short film. But holy crap, even though this movie's only an hour and 40 minutes long, it feels twice that length. But if Amazon's going to continue to release movies in the theater where it feels like they took every single shortcut humanly possible, it will start to backfire, because this is a major year for Amazon MGM as a studio and as a distributor, because anywhere between 12 and 16 movies with their logo at the front are going to be playing theatrically this year. And the question is, how big would those releases be and for how long before they're put on their streaming service? But one of the big ones is Masters of the Universe, where Amazon has the domestic rights and Sony has the international rights. But that's a big, IP, special effects driven franchise movie. But if Amazon starts developing a reputation where their movies should go straight to the streamer as opposed to the theater, well, then people will stay home and wait. And I guess that's the billion-dollar question in the modern age. In 2026, what movies belong on a streamer or should go straight to a streamer, and what movies deserve to play theatrically? Because once upon a time, every conceivable genre played in the theater. But over time, it's like little genres just keep kind of falling by the wayside, and to the point where all we get are basically franchise movies designed for the entire family, which is a very kind of bland, boring, movie-going landscape. So I would love it if we could start seeing sci-fi murder mysteries back on the screen on the regular. I mean, in the 1990s, when I was in high school and in college, we got all kinds of wild, original, oftentimes low-budget science fiction films that played very well theatrically, and I loved it. We just ate it up, and we didn't know how good we had it. But whatever your first impression was when you first saw the trailer for Mercy, your first impression was probably right. Because for me, it looked like a streamer, it felt like a streamer, and most likely, it probably should be a streamer. I went more just because I'm interested in following Amazon's strategy this year. Like, come what may, good or bad, I'm just going to be following it very closely in terms of box office and audience reception. And also, I'm just a believer in original science fiction movie. And I spend so much time on this channel ranting and raving about the pitiful, pathetic state of most of our franchises, whether it's Star Trek or Star Wars or Lord of the Rings or Marvel or DC or, throw a rock at any franchise and most likely it completely sucks. And not only sucks, but like sucks balls. So I feel like I need to kind of put my money where my mouth is and actually support original science fiction when it's in the theater. But if you're expecting a return to form for director Timur Bekmambetov, then you're probably going to be disappointed. And if you don't know who this director is, about 21 or 22 years ago, when the first trailer for Night Watch dropped online, people lost their goddamn minds, myself included. That's actually the peak of my interest in his career, was when I first saw the trailer. I was like, oh my god, like the next big international kick-ass director of genre films has arrived, where it's a Russian vampire film unlike anything we've ever seen. And I remember seeing the movie and thinking, the trailer was so goddamn good. Maybe it set up unrealistic expectations, but I guess the promise of that filmmaker at that time never really seemed to get fully realized. And I thought his movie adaptation of Wanted was fucking terrible, because I'd loved and adored the original Mark Millar comic. And when that movie came out with Angelina Jolie, I was like, this is what y'all came up with? And who knows, maybe he was hired after the adaptation had already been written, but they basically took the first couple pages of the comic and then threw the rest out and then just made an original movie. And I thought it was pretty lame, pretty lousy. But there are very few scenes in this movie where he gets to show off what he can do as a filmmaker, or at least a very few scenes until the very end, because most of the movie is just Chris Pratt looking for evidence to prove his innocence, because in this dystopian environment, you're presumed guilty until you prove your innocence. And so he's looking up cell phone records and email records and surveillance footage and that sort of thing. But it feels a little bit like you're just spending an hour scrolling through Instagram or YouTube or whatever, and it's like, dude, I get this all day, every day already. I don't need to pay and go to a theater to get the experience of watching Chris Pratt kind of doom scrolling through the internet. So yeah, I was bored out of my goddamn mind for most of it. And the problems extend or carry over to some of the other people involved in this movie. Because for huge chunks of this movie, Chris Pratt's partner within the movie is having to go out into the field to gather evidence for him. And his partner is played by Callie Rice, I'm not quite sure how you pronounce her name, but former professional boxer who made a big splash on the show, True Detective Night Country. And one of the reasons I stopped watching that show, and one of the reasons I struggled with Mercy, is that while Ms. Rice might be a bad motherfucker when it comes to knocking people out, I mean, she had a total of 27 fights. She won 19 of them, 5 of which are by knockout. So a bad motherfucker who knows what she's doing in a fist fight. Not only can she not act, she acts in a way where it's like she's trying to sabotage and destroy whatever movie she's in. It's if there's anything resembling personality or emotion or an ebb and flow to the story, she kind of willfully and deliberately avoids any sort of tone of voice that actually might engage the audience. I mean, her acting, let's just say she explores a new low when it comes to the acting craft in this movie. So much so, you're like, you know what? I will skip whatever shows or movies you're in for the rest of my life, because you seem to have open antagonism to this new career that you've adopted. Maybe go back to beating the fuck out of people. Try a career in MMA or professional wrestling, but acting is not her forte. But I think the main reason the great majority of this movie does not work is due to a lack of verisimilitude. And that's a word that I learned from following the channel of Robert Meyer Burnett. But basically, the short version of verisimilitude is the quality that makes a fictional work seem true or real. And if you're making a dystopian kind of cautionary tale about the world of artificial intelligence, well, then you have to believe the scenario that's been set up by the premise of the movie. And when an audience member starts to doubt the verisimilitude of your premise or your movie or whatever the case might be, and your only answer is, well, if we make any any changes, well, then the movie can't happen. Well, then perhaps you ought to rethink your premise or rethink your story, just rethink your plot overall. Because in the very first scene of this movie, we have Chris Pratt's character coming out of a drunken stupor. He's already in the chair and he's told by this AI judge, jury, and executioner, you have 90 minutes to prove your innocence or you're going to be executed in that chair. But the investigation for the alleged crime is still ongoing. Like, there are cops still on the crime scene gathering evidence. So it's like, well, then why is there a ticking clock? And of course, the writer's going to say, well, you need a ticking clock in order to create a sense of urgency. I'm like, but it makes the audience call bullshit. And when it comes to dystopian science fiction stories, I'm open to any idea or any concept or any plot or premise that a writer wants to cook up. However, you got to make me believe. You got to do the heavy lifting. You got to do the initial work to make me believe that this is a compelling, fully realized world, and then I'll basically follow you wherever you want to take me. But if I'm calling bullshit within the first few minutes, well, then I'm sorry. The whole movie is basically dead on arrival, unless you're just a total dumbass. You're like, oh, it's AI. AI is bad, and so I'm just going to watch this movie about how AI is bad. Well, I'm sorry. I need more to get emotionally invested in a movie. And I'm totally fine with, like, you know, if Hollywood wants to make 100 million movies criticizing AI, I'll be the first to applaud their intentions, irrespective of how the movies turn out. But one of my biggest obstacles to getting invested in this movie and believing in this new take on like the future of law enforcement in Los Angeles is that on a daily basis, we've seen just how fucking stupid AI can be. Like, on any given day, if you're on Twitter, aka X, and you're trying to identify a movie based on a still image and or a clip. Grok, what is this movie? 9 times out of 10, Grok gets it wrong. I'm like, and I'm constantly like arguing with this AI. I'm like, no, it's this. And Grok's like, are you sure? I'm like, yes, I'm sure. I've seen it like 50 times. Like, what the fuck are you talking about? You're supposed to be the artificial intelligence with all this information at your fingertips, and yet you cannot identify a single clip from like a well-known movie. And so if people want us to believe that AI might possibly take over law enforcement and the courts, et cetera, and so forth, well, then the writer's going to have to do some heavy lifting to make us believe. Like, what are some great examples of AI being believable in previous movies? Like the 1982 version of Tron. There's some AI in there that is believable. Or Terminator. James Cameron made us believe in the AI of that concept. Or the Wachowskis, when they made The Matrix, they made us believe. But it's because they have creativity and imagination, and they do the heavy lifting up front so that we can just enjoy the ride after the initial 5 or 10 minutes. Mercy never really finds firm footing, but once again, by some miracle, because I didn't walk out of the movie over the first hour, I did manage to enjoy, like the last 20, enjoy is a strong word, I did manage to watch the last 20 or 30 minutes. So that's about the best I can say about this movie. If you want to watch a movie that is utterly tedious and unremarkable for the first hour and becomes vaguely watchable for the last 20 or 30 minutes, that is Mercy, which is probably the least enthusiastic review for a mediocre movie that I've ever given on this channel. And as long as I'm talking all this trash about the screenplay, I might as well call attention to the individual responsible for this unique piece of cinema, and his name is Marco Van Bell. And his biggest previous credit, he wrote and directed a movie called Arthur and Merlin from 2015, which I did not see, although I'm typically a sucker for stories about King Arthur and Merlin, etc. But having now seen his handiwork on display in Mercy, I will not be rushing out and watching Arthur and Merlin anytime soon. But I'm determined to follow the ups and downs of Amazon's theatrical push this year, because I'm hoping it'll succeed, but they're going to need to do better than Mercy, which, so let's see, maybe Masters of the Universe will be that movie. Like, for me, I've seen so many franchises from my childhood destroyed over the last 5 years. I refuse to believe that any franchise that's being resurrected from my childhood has any chance of success.
Sir, you can't do that.
Don't worry, the sword's mine.
And if you want me to believe that Masters of the Universe can make a return, I mean, I was like a day one Masters of the Universe action figure collector, show watcher, etc. I mean, I was like, 6 or 7 when the figures came out, and like 7 or 8 when the show came out. I was the perfect target audience. And even I'm like, you know what? You gotta make me a believer. And so I'm not going to waste any emotional energy or intellectual energy getting excited about Masters of the Universe until I'm sitting down in the theater to watch it. But I'm sure Amazon's going to do their best to try to get us excited between now and June. But I think that's their biggest release of the year. But I need to look at their release schedule and see, how are they trying to differentiate themselves from Netflix? How are they trying to differentiate themselves from the more traditional media companies out there like, Disney or Warner Brothers? Warner Brothers might soon be a part of Netflix. We shall have to see on that as well. But it's an interesting year for the movie industry, and I applaud MGM for believing in theatrical But in the end, this is an execution-based industry, and the movie's got to deliver, and Mercy does not. But I think that's all I've got to say. So if you enjoyed this video, please consider liking, subscribing, hitting that notification bell, and let me know what you think in the comments below. But more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.